So, I was sat at home one day, bathing in the sun that has so gracefully entered the UK for summertime, and I came across a great book called Essentialism. The book talks about learning to focus on what's actually important, learning to say no to others, and basically realizing that trying to do everything at once will get you nowhere. Instead, your focus should be on very few things in order to feel happier and more fulfilled as you achieve greater results in less activities, rather than, mediocre results across many. It provides a diagram to show this exact concept as a visual representation, and as I let myself take this concept in, I slowly but surely realised that the ideas presented in this book about what not to do felt, oddly familiar to what we're seeing in the modern day. I think you see where this is going. But when the first Iron Man movie was released all the way back in 2008, I don't think anyone thought that it would be the first of a long line of superhero projects that would go on to be one of the biggest cinematic franchises in history. It set in stone a way of storytelling that many before them had tried out and failed, and like with the 4-Minute Mile, once one person did it, suddenly everyone can, and because of the success at Marvel Studios, everyone was as quick to use this strategy as I am to shit on Disney. Now you could say that the X-Men were the first to do such a thing, but let's be honest, that whole thing was just a mess and had no coherent storyline. The MCU on the other hand felt so naturally done, as if they had this thing planned from very early days, and they just needed, that first project to take off in order to get things started. Anyway, we all know that over the next 11 years, they would go on to create 22 more projects, all culminating into a very satisfying finale with Avengers Endgame, and I hope you'll forgive me if I just decide to ignore what came after. Anyway, with the insane success of this thing, many studios since have obviously tried to do the same. DC began their attempt with Man of Steel, where instead of going on to make origin movies for the rest of the other major characters, and slowly building the thing up, making sure that each first movie was focused on telling a singular story and not getting distracted by the potential bigger picture, they got very ahead of themselves and went on to introduce one of the biggest comic book characters of all time in a movie that's not even his own, and just a year later, they made the Justice League with 3 other major characters before any of them got their own story. Anyway, that whole thing sucked. Star Wars also gave this a go, but the problem with Star Wars is that they basically have infinite amounts of stories to tell, which might sound like a great thing at first, until you realise that they're basically just creating projects to push identity politics, instead of, good and original stories. And the only reason that they have any remote success in the first place is because of the IP. Anyway, enough of my rant about how much I just despise Disney, because I've got a new thing to rant about today, and that is the newfound rise of
expanding the universe.
Literally everyone's doing it nowadays, and whether you like it or not, there will most likely come a time where you can't even tune into a new series without 17 other spin-off projects that you need to watch just to understand the basic premise. Don't believe me? Let me give you a few small examples of a new beginning to all of this, in case you haven't, had the chance to hear about them yourself. The MCU going ahead and introducing a bunch of characters that no one cares about, and that are all as suspiciously diverse as they are bland, all because they want to continue after Endgame and continue to
expand the universe.
The Boys, creating a spin-off about a bunch of superhero teenagers coming to terms with their abilities in order to
expand the universe.
John Wick, releasing a spin-off TV show and movie, as well as the high likelihood of another sequel, even after that ending to John Wick 4, all because the movies were very successful, and so they, of course, feel the need to
expand the universe.
Star Wars, creating knows how many other new projects to, once again,
expand the universe.
And let's not forget the brand new DC universe headed by James Gunn, which instead of taking a simple and logical route of kicking things off with, just solely Batman and Superman, the 2 biggest superhero IPs of all time, they'll instead start off with an animated TV series with several unknown characters, another entire group which is just it's just beta Justice League, and Waller. Waller. All before we get the first Superman movie, because even though we're starting from scratch, and we should have learned from the mistakes of the past, it's apparently never too early to
expand the universe.
And damn, that's just a few of many. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for sequels and spin-offs if they, well-deserved, well-written, are slowly released over time to allow the audience enough leeway to, consume what already is, ensure the new project is of the best quality it can be, and stays true to the world that's already been established, and, allows fans to build anticipation and hype for this new project for when it's eventually released. But most studios fall into the trap of thinking that they have to play catch-up with those who've already done it, and because they're so focused on expanding their horizons as soon as possible, they lose sight of what actually matters. Because see, the reason that certain franchises work so well is because the first movie wasn't created with a definite answer that it would be the first of many. The people behind it knew that despite the idea of, building the franchise up was exciting and something that, very few other people had done, the first entry would have to be something really special in order to, captivate audiences to this world and get them excited at the idea of introducing new characters who down the line would interact and come full circle. I mean, the entire MCU going forward rested on the shoulders of Iron Man being a hit if they were to, go forward and put this thing together in this insane world of superheroes, and without that start, we probably would have never gotten that 12 years of storytelling, which came to be super popular. And again, I'm not going to talk about what came after. So the first obvious issue at hand is, of course, quantity over quality. Studios are trying to do too much at once, or rushing into stories that we shouldn't be seeing for at least a good few years, or because they're so desperate to,
expand the universe
and get the show running, even though we barely know enough about the characters as it is. We've seen what happens to a cinematic universe when they rush into things, and what you eventually get is just a complete mess, where you're telling a bunch of stories which all end up being extremely mediocre because you never minimize your focus to one or two at a time, and because you were so desperate to get these new characters into the universe as quick as possible. And it wasn't just this, they were all clearly focused on setting the character up for bigger things going forward, instead of just making the singular project the best it could be, and building like the interconnectedness from there. Because what you get from this is just a massive cluster where you've got 20-something new characters that no one gives a about because their story wasn't interesting enough, and the character was poorly written so that they're just bland and uninteresting, or so that they're just a complete asshole that you're apparently meant to root for. And this goes back to the diagram from earlier. Now, I'm not saying that they should have focused on one singular movie, but imagine that they cut out all of these and solely focused on these few. The quality of the writing, the character arcs, and the CGI would all have been of immensely greater quality, and it would have actually given fans the time to gain anticipation for the next project, and it would have made them happier with the overall outcome. But listen, it's not just the quantity of the projects either, it's also the quantity of stories being told across few projects. Take a look at the DCEU. They made the Justice League with 3 of the 6 characters not even having their own stories prior. Again, they were so eager to catch up with their competitor that they lost sight of what actually mattered, and again, to no one's surprise, this thing went on to be a complete failure, and basically a complete waste of 10 years of storytelling that they'll be completely restarting 2 years from now. Now, the other thing that studios don't do very often, and we all know the reason why, is realizing that there can always be too much of a good thing. When a franchise is super successful, the people behind it can't help but think that, the logical move would be to continue making projects centered around this universe, as the fans clearly enjoy them, right? And sure, do that if there's genuinely more stories to be told, but it gets to a point where even if the main overall story is over, and came to, a very satisfying conclusion that fans are happy with, and would otherwise rest easy knowing that this set of movies that they loved so much has come to a great end, they just have to make more, and more, and more. The MCU after the Infinity Saga, Star Wars after the Skywalker Saga, Lord of the Rings after the original trilogy, John Wick after, again, that ending to the recent movie. It just doesn't stop. But I mean, with all the, ching that they're racking in, you can't exactly blame them. If it works, don't try change it, right? But the issue is that all that really stays the same eventually is just the IP, and without that, the 17th new projects that you can make when it should have ended at number 6 just means fuck all. What fans would really prefer is if you took the learning lessons from the movies that were so successful for you and applied them to brand new stories with new and exciting characters that fans can be introduced to and want to see more of, rather than staying in the same lane and continuing to drive forward, even when your final destination was several miles back, just because it feels so good to keep going at 100 miles per hour. Because what they don't realise is that somewhere along the highway, they're going to hit a stump, leaving the car to crash and burn, and so, while it felt good to keep going instead of taking that turn onto a different lane, it won't feel so good when your car is on fire and burning to pieces, and now you have to walk all the way home with your head down in shame, wondering where it all went wrong. Then again, there's some who saw the stump a long time ago and thought they could just simply avoid it, but dread it, run from it.
Destiny arrives all the same.
So I guess the simple solution to all of this is a few things to just take on in your life. 1. Don't see or acknowledge the new projects that has no major relevance to the main story. 2. Vote with your money by just not seeing the projects that you never asked for or wanted to be made. Or 3. If you're going to watch it, just use the power of your brain to imagine that this thing is taking place in a separate universe where the story is 10 times worse than the one that's actually occurring in canon. And so if it's you don't have to feel so bad. I know that I've used this one to my advantage quite a bit. So what are your thoughts on the whole universe building? Because personally, I'm kind of sick of it, and I just want to go back to the time where we made movies for the sake of making a good movie, rather than creating, a cinematic universe. Anyway, thank you for watching the video. Like, subscribe, all that jazz. It won't force you though, and I will see you in the next one very, very soon. Bye.